Nepsis Foundation Video Series 1, Part 2 of PAEAN'S Song, A Diagnosis. The text of PAEAN'S Song starts out looking something like this, with this particular image of a figure facing the other world, and describes the artificer. The artificer, such as one finds in James Joyce's A Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man, or Ulysses. The artificer is one who creates and recreates, the one who searches between worlds. Such a shaman, artist, priest, poet, warrior even. Explored here is a primordial figure whose personality and cultural function attempts mediation of the affairs of this world with the intentions of the divine spirit, or the non-temporal world. This figure fights the battle for sentient being. The text continues on its title page with this description. First, from Carl Jung's Secret of the Golden Flower, which is really Chinese Tantra. One begins to explore the complex theories associated with the Muladhara, or in Sanskrit, the root chakra, the earth chakra, where the goddess resides, and all creativity derives from that personality associated with that fundamental chakra. And then continuing through this Chinese approach to our topic, with the I Ching, there's a line in number 57 that goes like this. It takes a priest to see the problem. It takes a sorcerer to solve it. Nepsis is a 21st century guide to consciousness. It is a personal encounter with shamanism, Buddhism, yoga specifically, and through yoga, the Vedas, of course, but then all of asceticism, because we also studied monasticism, Western monasticism, and the hesychasm of Christianity, which has these certain practices for developing certain states of mind about holiness. And holiness is at the core of all of this, because the path that is followed by the Nepsis personality, or the person seeking the hesychast state of stillness, is a pure path, a holy path. Though one might fight through all of the negative and sensuality and sinful attitudes associated with the world, but nonetheless one is trained and directed towards the holy. Also, this is taken through the perspective of contemporary critical thought. Or more poetically, Nepsis is an encounter with interstate hitchhikers in an age of free agent, business, warriors, riding their steeds along the precipice of eternity. Rock shards fly, also free as the war party passes. Sparked blithely, we slip clueless into the abyss. That exactly is what this whole project is meant to counter. Part 1 records the original and spontaneous, sometimes paranormal, Pacific Rim experiences that set this project in motion. Here flows the kindness of God and the adventure of the road. This record is in the form of a letter from a priest to his bishop, explaining why the bishop should not suspend him. Part 2 records a series of intellectual experiences in this same vein, trying to communicate more widely the surprising contents of Part 1. Part 3 of Nepsis, Letter to a Bishop, continues the account of the original experiences referred to in Part 1 through the experience itself, continues in violence and darkness, working its way to a light that casts no shadow. The ways of light, so modestly, authentically, and honestly, have somehow failed to save us from our arrival at this viciously dangerous historical moment. Yet perhaps there is still a way in between. Who can tell why these pilgrimages started in the first place? Young men coming of age, independent, adventure carte blanche, destiny. There certainly were all the usual justifications. But I have had to make other justification sense to secular, even ecclesial authorities. Many boundaries have been trespassed since that first naive journey. Then, 40 years ago, in 1970, it was only a quest. It has become, since, a pilgrimage trespassing the boundaries between this world and the other one. I am a priest according to the order of Melchizedek. This is at the heart of what happens in this story. But for now, it's not important. Only that what must happen actually takes place. For that, apparently, I had to be a priest. The first journey that initiated this series of pilgrimages or journeys or hitchhiking pilgrimages started in 1970 and kept going into the 90s. And hitchhiking is the mode. There are certain rules, sort of unwritten rules, is not to take any type of public transportation, to only accept rides gratuitously offered by passerbys. Everybody has seen hitchhikers out on the road. They're begging for something. One becomes a beggar. And in the type of spirituality that I was taught in the Christian monasteries, we're all beggars before God. Christ may have offered us brotherhood, and perhaps that's the end, the union with God, the fellowship with God. But along the way, we are so naive and so ignorant, individually and en masse, that we're all beggars before God. We don't know, really. However sure we seem, we never really know how to do it or what's the best way of doing it. But life becomes a search for that path, which provides itself. But even that is hard to find. And so I felt that hitchhiking, because it had this aspect of begging as well as putting oneself in a lower position than those surrounding, had its advantages for access, entrance to the lives of others, but also as it travels across the landscapes of the world, one enters into the psyche of the places through which one passes. The first trip was just that. It was something that I did, I think, my second year in college. I was 21 and 21, and I traveled around the perimeter of the United States with just a small backpack. I remember getting to New Orleans and the sort of the unkind Bourbon Street atmosphere that I really didn't like very much, though the rest of New Orleans is quite beautiful, and even that area is colorful enough. But then there'd already been the experiences in the Midwest of getting to the Midwest from California, and I remember laying on the hood of a car somewhere in the Midwest and watching the lightning at night from those wonderful summer storms that one has in that part of the country, and then traveling down south and around the Gulf over to Petersburg, Florida, and then from there encountering someone or an experience. It wasn't a traumatic experience, but it was opening the eyes of the world, and that's what I think happened, opening the eyes to the world, rather, about what one might find. But always this sense, not only of the kindness of people, but also the kindness of God. The two seem to work hand in hand. And then I continued until up the East Coast and had amazing experiences in Washington, D.C., where this law student had picked me up in his convertible MG, and we toured Washington and had a fine time of young men out in the world. And then all the way up into New England and Maine and picking blueberries out where there's not only blueberries, but there's incredible heat and bears and these horrific horseflies, these huge things that bite like the devil. And then across the United States, having run out of money on the East Coast, and so not only begging for ride, but begging for food, and traveling across Wyoming and Montana, and I remember riding in the back of an empty grain truck, and just the glory of driving across, I think it was Wyoming, the beautiful big sky and the distant mountains and the purity of it. It was perfect. And then getting to the West Coast and taking up companionship of a fellow traveler, and the two of us hitchhiking together down the California coast to a place called Geyserville, and then walking over the coastal range of mountains until you got to Highway 1. We were on 101, and then we hiked over to 1, and in those days it was common to find counterculture communes, and we stayed with this one couple that had a little baby, a beautiful little boy running around and in the cold of the morning barefoot and toughening himself for the world that he had to grow up in. And we continued to the coast, and my friend stayed in San Francisco, and I came home a much healthier and more mature, perhaps, a feeling of vigor that I hadn't felt before, a refreshment. But in transiting from that early experience, for various reasons, through the art world, really, I came in contact with the monastery. And then through the monastery, I came in contact with the seminary. And a whole different approach to the world than the typical American consciousness that I had been raised with. And that opened whole dimensions of being for me that I don't compare in any prejudiced way with what my parents had provided for me, but it was definitely a different perspective, and has allowed exploration that I believe that has opened my mind and my heart as the way of pilgrimage is intended to do. Remember, one is a beggar before God, as a hitchhiker, as a peregrino, a pilgrim. And it's different than riding motorcycles or bicycles or even walking, because when you're walking, you're still in control. When you're riding a motorcycle, you're still in control. And it's always a matter of degree and attitude, of course. I mean, so that's not the most important thing, but there is an advantage to standing there and exposing one's personality to the world and asking for help, asking to share an experience with somebody else. And usually one discovers the kindness of strangers. So with that, I'll conclude this part 1 and then begin to get to what our talks are really trying to discover. and to focus on. But this was pilgrimage 1. Well, but it's pilgrimage 5 that we're going to focus on next, because that's when the fire forks really start happening. So with that, I'll conclude and encourage you to look for this Nepsis series of videos described as PAEAN'S Song Part 3.